Welcome to today's webinar, R.I.P. Traditional Performance Reviews, Long Live Continuous Performance Management. My name is Danny Smith, and I am the Manager of Events and Marketing at MicroExcel, and I'll be moderating the webinar today. During today's presentation, we will discuss why it's critical to enhance your traditional performance processes, create opportunities to be truly engaged with your employees throughout the year, and advance your corrective actions then and there, and not at the last minute. We will also cover how to use SuccessFactors continuous performance management to support this transformation. Our presenter for today is Mr. Abe Arriguez. Abe is the Global SAP Practice Leader at MicroExcel with 19 years of experience in the technology industry. Just a few laundry items before we get started. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent out in a few days. Also, we will have a Q&A portion at the end, so please type any questions you may have in the questions box, and we will get to those in the order they are received. If you have any questions after the webinar, please feel free to contact us at info@microexcel.com. At the conclusion of today's webinar, there will be a brief survey. Please do take a few moments and share your thoughts with us. Without further ado, I'd like to present our speaker for today's event, Mr. Abe Arriguez.
Thanks, Danny, and welcome to everybody that's attending. Appreciate you taking the time to participate in this webinar. Hopefully you find informative, and hopefully it'll elicit some thought around performance management. Just to kind of set the stage for what we're going to be discussing today. So I know, we're talking about kind of this novel new idea, and I shouldn't say that it's new, but there's been more of a drive to relook at how we gauge, measure, quantify, human capital performance, and in particular the performance of our individual contributors or our employees. And that idea has been around for a good bit of time, but it's really thinking about how can we change our line of thinking, that's truly going to align even the individual employee to the topmost edict or imperative of a business strategy. And there's been a lot of investment over the last 5 to 10 years around talent management solutions to help bridge that gap. Now, performance management, though, is one of those areas that has been, accounted for a long period of time. But how it's been accounted for is really the body of the content of this webinar, right? So to start off with, let's talk about performance management in general, right? What's the objective of why organizations and why HR departments are investing any kind of time and energy in performance management, right? Well, it's been proven time and again that when we're able to define the objectives of an employee and we provide them some sort of feedback, of how they perform against those objectives, and typically on an annual basis, most organizations have been able to improve on some key metrics, whether it's, retaining employees, whether employees feel like they're more vested into the performance of the overall organization, and then ultimately driving, better top line growth for the company, right? So as we gauge organizations that have some sort of measurement or some sort of performance management processes implemented within their organization, typically, they're able to reduce their turnover by up to 36%, right? Employees feel, to the tune of 10% that they're, a bit better engaged, and organizations typically, are able to make an impact from a top level of production to the tune of 25%. Now that data is really, focused on organizations that have HR departments that are fostering some sort of performance management process, whether they're leveraging technology or not, whether they're leveraging one performance management process versus multiple ones across an organization. So just for you to understand kind of that data footprint. But ultimately, or kind of in general, that's kind of the benefit that you get by having some sort of performance management process. Now, however, the reality is, and when we look at the digital age today and kind of the ever evolving workforce of global and local companies, is quite frequently most performance management programs fail to meet the expectations, and not only of the employees, but all the way to the executives. So a couple studies have shown that 48% of executives, according to a Deloitte study, have said that their PM initiatives have been weak, at best weak, in improving people development and truly helping drive business imperatives, right? So they're not seeing that business value, though if you think about it, and most organizations, let's say here in North America, are investing a significant amount of time and energy. So think about the typical yearly appraisal process. Think of it from a manager's perspective. Come January, assuming a calendar year, fiscal year, you're setting aside a few weeks to prepare performance review templates, right? Getting your data collated, to have, your performance appraisal process with your employees, right? You're assigning some numeric values. You're working with HR. You're submitting forms, right? It's a pretty heavy-handed, pretty involved process, right? But it's being done usually at the time where we're starting a new business plan in the new year, right? And we're trying to launch with some sort of sense of urgency, but we're being bogged down by that process, right? So it seems counterintuitive. So executives get exasperated when they're not seeing that return of performance management, and to compound it, it takes a lot of human time to actually get it accomplished. Now let's flip it to the other side of the fence, and let's look at it from the employee perspective, right? So when we think about employee engagement, if we rewound the clock about 15 years ago, HR was really looked at as simply an administrative function that we capture HR data, right? It really wasn't putting the people, at the center of that strategic pillar. It was more about making sure that had compliance, right? We met statutory needs of whatever regions that we're operating in, and we're able to pay people, we're able to capture their time, and make sure that they have, specific job functions. Now, I'm very glad and very, enthused, to see that shifting mentality over the last 15 years to be more talent engaged, right? So there's been a lot of investment of time and energy and technology, quite frankly, to drive better employee engagement. However, through all that activity, through all that change, through all that transformation and that paradigm shift, employees are still saying that they're underwhelmed with the performance management process to the tune of 66%, right? And quite frankly, they also say that it's a distraction. It impedes their productivity, right? So you think about this, if I'm an individual contributor in a particular job function, and I've got my goals that were set by management, and I go about doing my business, and I have successes, I have some failures, I have some things that I need to work on, I need things to develop on, right? That constantly evolves over 12 months. So when I get to the annual appraisal process, right, I got to then now kind of take a step back away from my job function at the moment in time, the priorities from the time, and I have to self-reflect on things that might have happened months ago, right? So it really drives kind of a distraction, because now I'm looking backwards to trying to say how can I position myself in the best light in front of my manager so this appraisal process goes well, right? So it's an event that employees find almost to be not only impeding productivity, but maybe a little bit intimidating, right? Sometimes a lot of times we're they feel like they're getting a lot of feedback all in one fell swoop, and it can become overwhelming. And again, it's not setting the tone for success going into the new year. Now, fortunately, in talking to and surveying employees and in surveying management and for surveying organizations, there's a self-reflection point now that's occurring in the global economy where most organizations identify to the tune of 71% that they need to reinvent, they need to rethink how they manage their performance management processes. So at least that's a step forward. But today we'll talk a little bit more about what that means. Now let's think about why performance management programs fail. So when I'm talking about my anecdote around employees, it's very much backwards looking, right? Rear view mirror thinking, right? So we're spending a lot of time evaluating our past performance. Now, not only is that, there's a lot of chance to forget things or inaccurate because we're not dealing with real data. Also, we're evaluating performance against business conditions that already have happened, right? They may not be reflective of our, the organization's business conditions today or in the future. So it's not necessarily an accurate perspective. Additionally, many performance management processes are pretty rigid. Why? Because, when you think about some large multinational organizations, it becomes a bit cumbersome to try to, have different performance management processes for different constituencies, different user groups, business groups, things of the sort, right? So quite often organizations use a one-size-fits-all or a template approach that doesn't really adapt to the organizational culture diversity of that organization. Additionally, when we're talking about performance management, right, we're talking about the individual contributor, right? Yes, even our, whether you're a top, contributor, whether you're kind of in the middle of the pack, or maybe you're struggling, right? If the discussion around performance and this discussion around remedying performance happens, on an annual or maybe a semi-annual basis, quite often it's too late to course correct. So multiple things happen. One is, the employee's already heading down a path. Two is that there's a lot of opportunity costs, right? Because if we corrected earlier, we could have potentially had a more productive employee. And even if it was, somebody that historically has been a strong performer, but it was just struggling against some sort of objectives because they were missing on some key learning objectives, right? That's somebody that we want to invest energy to, but we're not realizing there's a problem until it's too late. And more often than not, we lose them. We lose them because as an engaged employee, or even worse, we lose them as an employee for our organization altogether. So how do we address this? Now, I want to ensure that, obviously the title of the slide is the answer is continuous performance management, but there's some caveats to that. There is a different way of thinking so that we more proactively deal with the challenges of performance management, but as all processes, right? Processes have to be clear, they have to be well communicated, they have to be well established and implemented, and they have to be managed by some sort of technology or some systemic way to capture data and foster proactive collaborative performance management, right? I'm throwing a lot of terminology out that I haven't necessarily covered, but just want to set that expectation. If you're coming in thinking that, I'm going to learn about continuous performance management and it's something that is exciting and can provide value, well, absolutely. But again, it shouldn't be implemented, from a knee-jerk reaction. There's thought that needs to be given to it. So that's what we're going to be covering here in the next few slides, right? So let's talk about what it means, right? So, the difference between traditional performance management and continuous performance management really has to deal with real-time, agile feedback. And it comes in incremental and it comes in iteratively between a manager and employee, right? So, when you think about traditional performance management, we think about semi-annual or annual appraisals, right? Those are point-in-time events, right? We have them on the calendar. We know when they're going to occur, but they're very formal, very, very inculcated into kind of corporate culture, right? Continuous performance management is more about advocating between the employee and the manager, and less about a top-line program, that HR is pushing on down to its employees, right? But it's things like near-term, short-term objective setting, one-on-ones, conversations, performance conversations, check-ins, real-time feedback. These are all synonymous to continuous performance management. The kind of the model or kind of the concept around continuous performance management actually has been leveraged over the last 5 or 6 years, and even probably longer than that. It's just never necessarily, have been formalized as a term. But over the last, 3 to 4 years, there's been a real momentum shift into trying to drive more of this kind of thinking into organizations. Right. So, there's some organizations like Apple that are leveraging this process to have a more active engagement with each of their employees, and they're seeing real benefits through that. But when you evaluate how they got that accomplished, that was probably the most important, because that was, the implementation approach of the process was really where the success was generated. So one thing that is a core pillar for continuous performance management is, obviously, it's about forward looking, right? And to be forward looking, it has to align with what the business imperative is, right? The business should drive the need around continuous performance management. So again, if I'm, let's say I'm an engineer in a manufacturing organization, and one of the edicts for the new year is for us to continue to innovate and expand the product portfolio that we manufacture and release to our customers, right? Then my performance management plan and the program that fosters my capability, my skill sets, my learned ability that's supported by the organization should all align, obviously, to that need of the business, right? But when we talk about continuous performance management, right, now we've got an ability to have early visibility if I'm aligning to that imperative, right? So as an engineer, I've got my skill sets. I might, I have a gap, so I need to take education on it, and that's something that I reviewed with my manager, right? In a typical annual appraisal process, I might not have the conversation until the 6 months or 12 months down the road, right? So again, too late to self-correct. But if we have early visibility and management is providing timely guidance of how the employees' goals and activities are aligned to the business need, and having frequent continuous performance conversations, and that's the key thing. And maybe we should simply say conversations, but it really relates to continuous performance, right? Now we're empowering the employees and the managers to be the drivers of the corporate strategic plan, right? We think about strategic plan, and we think about these lofty goals, these lofty business imperatives that are maybe in our mission statement, maybe they're in the plan that as a public company we'll release to the investors. But for that plan to be realized, it takes tactical activity and people on the field to actually execute that. And by implementing continuous performance management, these conversations are all centered around that. That has that at the epicenter. And because we have them more frequently, again, we're not only forward looking, but we're also being proactive in ensuring that we're heading down the right path. Okay? Now, one key consideration. So it's fantastic for us to talk about continuous performance management as an idea. And obviously, there's a lot of studies out there now that are supporting evidence of the fact that every organization at this point should at least consider this, right? But there are some implications, right? So if I'm looking forward to implement the process, again, to my earlier comment, don't implement the process just for the sake of implementing the process. Implement it because your business needs it, and HR is going to not only understand the need for the business, but also is going to have a mechanism to gather the data that's very necessary to make performance management effective, right? So, let's play the role of HR here. We still need to capture information, through the engagement of our employees and our managers in these performance management reviews and appraisals that allows us to, capture information around performance. It provides us data so that we can also look at the workforce, right? We can also look at, how we can improve managers' performance, how there's some trends that we needed to keep an eye on and things of the sort, right? But in reality, we have to be able to walk the tightrope of balancing, HR programs, and in this case, in performance management, and the needs of the employees, but it still has to be structurally managed and structurally organized, right? So when we look at it from an overall perspective, to truly impact the employee performance, we're going to have to provide them goals. We're going to have conversations. We have to have their development plans, right? And so if I look at the right side of the slide here, typically performance management is focused on the individual, right? Now, if we do it from a continuous management perspective, it should be, it could be weekly, could be just in time, but it's fluid. It's rather fluid, right? It should be oriented around developing the individual, to align to future needs of the businesses. So again, it's forward looking for them as well. It should be two-way communication with a productive dialogue between the manager and the employee. So very much driven by those two roles, and should be linked to present business needs and not of the past. Now, from an HR perspective, we still need to be able to capture data that's going to allow us to take those conversations and be able to look at the workforce overall, right? We still have very specific HR events that we need to plan for, that performance management is an input for. Like, we talk about our merit and bonus plans, right? We still, there's different line of thought whether we still will need to maintain semi and annual reviews, which actually there's a lot of healthy debate. Some organizations are doing away with semi and annual reviews altogether and just using continuous performance management as their performance management program. Some organizations are using a hybrid of both. And there's merits to it, but again, there has to be a conversation, right? Now, in the case of the organizations that leverage in a hybrid, they're still doing semi and annual because they still need that event or that milestone that drives data and activity that in turn, drives a workflow, for other HR processes like merit and bonus plans, right? Additionally, there's also more detail that can be, generated for comprehensive assessments that we can again leverage for other strategic HR purposes, right? But ultimately, it also could be an input for tying that data to our workforce decisions, right? If we look, retrospectively to how, let's say, a particular segment, maybe an R&D is performing against our objectives, and we notice that there's a trend of, maybe underperformance or not a lot of, top contributors. Why is that the case, right? But then, then we're playing the HR role, right? That's where we're serving the business into aligning our workforce that's going to drive the success of the strategic plan, right? So, the summarizer really here is that, yes, we want to put the employees and the managers at the forefront. We want to empower them, and continuous performance management is a great vehicle to do that. But to implement that process, there definitely has to be an HR and data perspective that has to be accounted for, right? That when you implement it, it aligns to your overall HR strategic plan. So a little bit more of a drill down, right? So for organizations that have implemented continuous performance management or are underway in that, there is some challenges, right? And so this is the things that we need to make sure that we do perform our due diligence, before we start on this initiative, right? If you can imagine, so if we're talking about an employee and a manager having a dozen or so conversations throughout the year, how do we ensure that they actually happen? How do we ensure that they're conducted in a manner that's conducive to constructive feedback that's being captured, right? How do we actually track that conversation to be meaningful and impactful and measurable, and something that us as HR can leverage, to help and improve the process, right? So that's where that systemic mechanism or the systemic process needs to be defined, whether that uses technology or not, right? And quite often when you see this is, the old way of performance management and doing the annual performance reviews cycle, right? Most managers became adept because that's been around for decades, right? So we know that, okay, well, come January, I'm going to be spending, an hour with my employee, and I'm going to, tell them all the good things that, that they accomplished, the things that their skill sets are well on their way, the things that, there were challenges for them, the things that they need to improve upon, right? It's already kind of really, hammered into our minds on how to do a review and the information that we need to provide them. Now, when we're talking about these one-on-one conversations, these regular check-ins, right? First, I got to remember that I need to have them, right? Because we get busy with other imperatives, but we have to remind managers of the fact, right? And then secondarily, it's more about coaching. It's more about providing incremental feedback that doesn't come off as just griping at them, for lack of a better word, but more so about encouraging and fostering the right behaviors that ultimately allow for a foundation of success for that employee, right? But quite often managers don't have that kind of training to provide that constructive feedback and coaching, right? So as us as HR, we need to identify that's a real problem, right? By empowering the employees and managers, we also have to empower them. We have to support them by providing them the skill sets to be able to properly support a continuous performance management process, right? And additionally, to the point around making sure that they actually happen, right? It's difficult to track. I mean, think about it's difficult sometimes to track our employee movements within our organization if we don't have some sort of systemic way of executing. But it makes it even more difficult when we're talking something about as subjective as feedback and coaching, right? So we still have to have a system in place to manage it. So it's not an impossible challenge, right? And we'll talk about how some organizations have accomplished that, but it's something that needs to be considered and it needs to be planned for. Now, fortunately, so going back to something I stated at the beginning with, over the last 15 years, there's been a lot of energy, focus, and investment into driving HR to be more of a strategic pillar in any organization, right? So a lot of talent management investment and implementation of processes that allow for better employee engagement. Now, in that inertia, performance management was probably a laggard as far as a priority area. Why? Because most organizations looked at, okay, well, we already have an HRIS system. We know how we've got payroll system, we've got benefits, we've got all the core things that we've done for many, many, many years. And performance management was one of those. Think about just the appraisal process, right? So, they put their energies and their focus on learning, recruiting, right? Succession planning for at the leadership level or middle management, having a more digital HR experience with their employees, self-services and things of the sort, and more analytics, right? And these are all important imperatives. What I'm about to say is not, in conflict of that. However, performance management was far behind those priorities over the last 10 years. But recently, over the last couple of years, and through surveys, organizations, HR leaders are starting to understand that, wait a minute, we're implementing all these, innovative new processes, right? Truly engaging with our people, but our performance review process is still, stuck in decades-old mentality and line of thinking, right? So in the survey that Cision released, performance management is actually now going up the priority chain, right? So now to the tune of 78%, most organizations are looking at performance management, and more specifically, continuous performance management as an opportunity to mature their talent engagement metrics, right? So it is an identified opportunity and a challenge that most organizations are looking to address head on. Now, from another perspective, right? So by the end of this decade, in 2020, the millennial generation is going to make up, about roughly half of the workforce, right? And this has been a hot topic for many organizations, and how to incorporate the millennial workforce into our organizations and properly motivate them, properly engage them, you properly reward them, and to foster full engagement into a business plan, because it is a different workforce than in previous generations, right? But in really surveying that generation from a workforce perspective, there's some common themes, right? That are going to make it difficult for organizations to attract and retain and engage in these employees, right? They anticipate, I'm obviously generalizing here, but they anticipate that they want to see a performance management process that motivates, not one that makes them look at the mirror and identifies all the things that they're doing wrong, right? Something that fosters more of a communication and not necessarily, just being, a one-sided conversation. And things that are always forward-looking, right? And forward-looking from a perspective of not 3-4 years from now, but in lesser increments, right? How how can I adjust myself? How can I improve myself on a daily, weekly, monthly basis? What are, what are my goals now? What are my goals next month? And, and the reality of this digital age is that, quite frankly, business conditions do change quite frequently. So our goals should align. So our goals should be agile. They could, they should be frequently reviewed, and they should be very clear and succinct and less numeric based. And that's the, again, I'm generalizing here, but from PwC's global generation study, these are the trends that HR leaders need to account for when engaging that workforce, right? And performance management is one of those things that turns that workforce, quite often off, right? So again, this is something that we absolutely have to incorporate into our plan. So let's talk about the systemic aspect of it, right? So, we've identified, that it's important, or at least it's an opportunity. Continuous performance management is an opportunity that's going to, if properly implemented with proper consideration, is absolutely going to help in driving some gains and some better engagement with our employees and our managers, right? However, to the challenges that we are already articulated about, how do we systemically drive it, right? How do we ensure that the process is being fostered and it's being driven, and the managers are doing what they need to do, and they're coaching and providing feedback, and they're having this dialogue with employees, and all those conversations that generate data and perspective is capturing that information. Well, HRT has also, HR technology, I should say, or HRT in short, is being developed to address that challenge, right? So now it's not necessarily that you need to implement technology to implement the process. There's organizations that have done it without it, but it becomes a whole lot easier from an HR department, because, stop me if you haven't heard this, but it's not like we've got unlimited resources within HR, right? We don't have, this mammoth workforce within the HR department that can capture all this feedback. I mean, if you think about, an organization that's got 100,000 employees and an HR department that's about 100 people large, how could they possibly ever track all these conversations, track that they're actually happening, track that they're being effective, right? That all the managers are properly coaching, and that the employees are deriving, value and feel a sense of engagement from that process, right? So vendors like SuccessFactors have developed solutions for more of that proactive performance management concept, or continuous performance management, or CPM in short, right? So SuccessFactors in performance management, and it has been a leader for quite a long time around just traditional performance management and goals management, but it has developed continuous performance management functionality that really looks at three pillars from a people perspective: the employee, the manager, and the HR analyst, right? I mean, again, we're simplifying for the purposes of the conversation, but when you really break it down, it's those three roles that are critical in driving a successful performance management initiative, right? So in SuccessFactors, we will have an ability to get the employee the feedback that they need to succeed, right? So we can document their progress against their goals, right? We can assign them their goals. We can capture performance achievements, right, in real time, so that when the employee has a conversation with a manager, it's very easy for them to have a conversation, and they don't have to go through that difficult R.I.P exercise, right? You think about that again, the appraisal process, that annual appraisal process, and I'm really, thinking back about what are the things that I achieved this year, right? And there might have been the small little project that was really impactful that you did back in February of the previous year, that you've kind of lost the sense of why that was important, right? Maybe not at the macro level, but more so on the micro level, right? So how can you properly position that as an achievement to your manager that in turn gets rewarded, right? So if we're capturing those achievements in real time, right, and we're having this constant dialogue with our managers, then we've got an ability to really paint an accurate picture of how we truly performed, right? And it's one that was painted by the employee as the artist, and that's the difference there, right? Now, another additional thing that's absolutely imperative, right? Whether you've had the manual form process or whether you've implemented traditional performance management technology, one of the biggest complaints is the fact that capturing that information is so arduous, right? When I think about forms, whether they're printed forms or online forms, and I've got 40 fields that I have to enter, and they're all mandatory, that doesn't get me excited about going through the performance management process, right? So a key tenet for implementing continuous performance management is that you need to keep it light. You need to keep it simple, and you have to make it mobile. So just think about it. If you as an employee now can avoid having to fill a bunch of forms or Word documents or having to go online and then go and sit in front in a conference room or meeting room with your manager and go through this elongated document on a PC, again, that's just not the digital age. But if we can have two smart devices, and I'm sitting across the table with my manager, and in real time, we're already sharing information that we have keyed in as we accomplished it and things of the sort, and that it's providing kind of a simple view that facilitates that discussion. Now we're talking. Now this is something that allows me to be a little bit more thought-provoking as far as my own performance, rather than worrying about the data input and again, the monotony of having to fill out an elongated form. So then when we look at the other side of the fence, at the manager, same thing. It's no different perspective. I mean, we ask our managers to be responsible for their own business unit or your own department and meet these corporate objectives or edicts, with all these sort of distractions, all these important business initiatives. The last thing they want to worry about is, again, reviewing long Word documents that, quite frankly, they don't believe that ultimately is going to drive out the best performance of the individuals, right? So if we're able to also keep a light, simple manner of capturing this information, it's incremental because we're doing it, over, a conversation, right? And over some mobile application that facilitates a very guided, simple conversation that's capturing this data. Now we're also painting that picture that the manager needs to have and that's going to allow them to make better decisions and also more accurately and positively provide constructive feedback to the employees, and then provide data to the third pillar, and that's to the HR department, right? So through SuccessFactors continuous performance management, I still have an ability to track the one-on-ones as they're happening in real time, right? I'm also a custodian for driving the workflow of the process, right? So I can remind the employees and managers to have a performance conversation. Hey, John, you haven't had your a performance conversation with Joe in the month of April. You guys were supposed to do that. Can you make sure you put that on the calendar? And these were the 3 conversations you had before. There's the theme, right? Just reminding them of the conversation, right? And additionally, maybe arming them through the solution with some basic guidance on how to perform coaching, right? A lot of times we make assumptions that management knows how to properly provide feedback to their employees, right? A lot of times our managers have been promoted as an individual contributor and maybe have not had formal management training, right? Now, we don't need to necessarily, have an overarching, just like, okay, stop everything what we're doing and let's break away our managers for 3 weeks or 4 weeks and give them how to coach training. But incrementally you can, in pieces, right? Through the solution, again, you think about it, the managers are themselves employees as well, and coaching is a skill set that needs to be nurtured and developed and should be part of the goals as well, right? So now we've got a cycle that's ongoing all the time at all levels, right? But really, where SuccessFactors shines is that these 3 pillars, these 3 roles are at the epicenter of the performance management process, in particular for continuous performance management. So just to give you a little bit of a preview of what it potentially looks like, so if you look at kind of the screenshots here, it really is to try to keep it as light as simple, right? Whether it's the traditional goal management performance assessments, in the performance management, goals management processes that most organizations have implemented, whether leveraging SuccessFactors or not, right? You think about performance reviews, being able to do cascading goals and track goal status and progress, right? Being able to do assessments, being able to write, performance reviews in a mature, corporately aligned manner. Obviously SuccessFactors has been doing that for a good bit of time and has functionality built into the application to do that as effectively and streamlined as possible, right? But now when we're talking about implementing the middle pillar of continuous performance management, now we've got functionality as far as activities and achievements trackers, right? So 2018, I kick off the year with this project my manager gave me, and gosh, I was able to deliver it in a week ahead of time, and I got that done at the end of January. It was supposed to be tracked to be done in February. I was able to get the resources that I needed. I got creative by pulling in these other approaches and things of the sort. This is an achievement and an activity that I should be able to track, keep it, and put in the system, so that when I have my performance management conversation, I'm quickly reminded of the real kind of cardinal knowledge on how I was able to achieve that goal, right? Or how I was able to help the business in some way, right? But now we've got an ability to provide simple feedback, both from an employee and a manager perspective, and coaching, right? And that's the key thing. It's not about talking at an employee, telling them the things that they should and should not do. It's more about collaborating and seeing, hey, how do we work together so you're successful an employee, and the system's conducive to that in fostering that, right? Making sure that the work aligns to some objectives. That linkage is vitally important, right? If we just say, hey, we want you to do this, or we want you to improve here, just for the sake of saying it without any kind of evidence behind it, and it's some tie to a business imperative or a business edict, that's where employees get lost. So like, where do I fit into the big scheme of things, right? And leveraging the system, there's an ability to align it and check that it's aligned, and make sure that you're fostering and kind of governing that linkage, right? You'll be able to always get a live summary of achievements at the employee level, at the manager level, and you have an ability to track and remind on one-on-ones, right? Now, going back to what we were talking about as far as organizations that either do away with annual appraisals or still leverage a hybrid approach. SuccessFactors allows you to manage for both, right? Again, there isn't a cookie cutter approach of, if you implement continuous performance management, you do not have to remove the annual appraisal process out of your organization. Some organizations are, some are not. It really depends on what you're trying to achieve with the annual performance review cycle. Some organizations are truly looking at performance management as a way to provide a feedback loop for the employee and the manager to constantly gauge and measure an employee's progress against their goals, against their objectives that are aligned to the business strategic plan. Some organizations are doing that and also using the performance management process as a data point that's going to serve an input for other areas. And in those cases, organizations have found a lot of value still maintaining the annual process, though they've skinnied it down, right? So if you're having 12 or 13 conversations throughout the year, then the annual appraisal process should be incremental and not a complete a redo of all the previous 13 conversations, right? So there's some nuances there that you just need to ask the questions of what you want to achieve by each of those conversations, and then the annual or semi-annual review cycle. And if they're still aligned, then you could have a hybrid approach, right? But the nice thing with the SuccessFactors, though, is that I've got the tools to systemically manage it, but at the same time, not implement rigidity into the process so that I'm not driving adoption. And that's the key thing that I think is a crucial consideration for the success of a program. Okay. So really, in conclusion, right? So why CPM? Why continuous performance management? It's really about empowering the employees and the managers, right? It's about having ongoing proactive dialogue that fosters that linkage to the business imperative and also is proactive in mitigating issues before they become real issues. If I'm able to provide a little coaching to an employee that's been a top performer, you know, the moment that maybe they're going down the wrong path and I'm able to address it and they see it and they can self-correct, now I've not only brought my employee back into the fold, you know, back to what they were, you know, how they performed in the past, but now you've got an employee that's even more vested into your business, right? And why is that the case? If I'm having this ongoing dialogue, is now you're basically handing the baton to them, right? This is not a top-down driven initiative. It's not an initiative that's being driven by just HR, right? They won't get the sense of that. Now, HR still obviously has an important role in this, right? But it's not going to be viewed as such, right? You know, so now, you know, employees and then managers are going to have much more excitement, much more vested interest into taking ownership of their own performance management process, right? But at the same time, HR, like I said, still has a seat at the table. Plays an important role, and HR is there to identify the solutions and the processes that balances the need of HR and of the business itself, right? But partly, you know, the thing that I think also gets lost when we're looking at continuous performance management, when we holistically look at performance management, the archaic ways that we've been doing it for 30, 40, 50 plus years now, it's very rigid. It's been basically this non-moving dinosaur for quite a bit of time. So to look at the polar opposite of that is to be agile, be incremental, right? You know, getting information in pieces, right? So we're kind of, you know, starting to paint the picture, but we're controlling how that picture is ultimately going to look. Is much more powerful, right? And then the reality is people change, the business change, business conditions change, right? Why shouldn't our goals, why shouldn't our feedback, you know, properly aligned with that, right? If a priority, you know, that we set at the beginning of the year all of a sudden changes, it should have an impact on the organization, and we should communicate it as such, right? And it should be clearly articulated, right? You know, but most performance management processes don't address it until the annual review cycle, which is too late, right? So by implementing continuous performance management in a systemic, you know, managed way, truly can improve your workforce performance, right? You know, by giving the employees that continuous feedback, by empowering the managers to provide coaching to them in a constructive manner, right? We're going to be able to truly evaluate how our human capital is performing against our goals and imperatives that are aligned to the strategic plan. But at the same time, we're still managing systemically as an HR department. You know, there's still, you know, there's things that we have to consider around legal risk, right? You know, statutory compliance, you know, as far as HR. And then probably most importantly, right, you know, HR departments are not increasing twofold every year, right? So we're still dealing with limited resources, and we're still being expected to make important workforce management decisions, right? You know, but you know, by, you know, continuing to leverage traditional performance management processes and solutions, we're not getting the data in real time that's going to allow me to make more impactful workforce management decisions in a timely manner. So hopefully, you know, that elicited some thought, you know, maybe some ideas for you. I know every organization is probably at a different level of implementing different type of performance management areas. I know this has been a topic of conversation for a lot of organizations that I've talked to about whether they implement these processes or not, right? You know, everybody's seen, you know, some of the success stories out there, but there's still a lot to be learned, you know, about implementing. And I think the biggest lesson learned that I would give you is have the conversation, but then, you know, truly look at how you would implement the process, how you would systemically manage, right? What solutions can you implement to help in that process, like SuccessFactors, right? So hopefully that gets that conversation going, or provided some data points that maybe help you formulate your plan. But at this point, you know, just so we can open it up for the team, I'm going to pass it back to Danny for our Q&A session of the webinar.
Thank you, Abe. Before I get started on the first question that we've had come through, I did want to remind everyone, because someone did ask, We will be sending out an email within the next few days that does have a link to this recording. So yes, you will receive this presentation and deck, like I said, within the next few days. So with that being said, Abe, the first question that we've had come through is, what is the biggest reason companies do not use CPM?
Well, I think it's more about the unknown, right? So again, when you think about it, traditional performance management processes have been around for a good bit of time, right? So most organizations have had the same processes for years and years and years, right? Maybe had other priorities that were, that took more of the attention, the energy, and the investment, right? So it's been on the back burner, right? So something that, it's always been, kind of looked at. That is nice. It looks like something that could potentially add value, but I'm not sure about it. So we'll kind of kick the can down the road. So I think it's more about not having the discussion, more so than anything, and something something to be said about what's the edict that they say. Sometimes the worst enemy to decision making is we've always done it that way, right? So we've always done it that way, the traditional process. We've kind of left it alone, and that seems to be a common theme. But fortunately now, at least people are asking the question around it. Some organizations are implementing. So I think as more information, more data, and more success stories are being published out, I think more organizations are going to take that brave step and move forward. That hopefully makes a meaningful impact into their workforce.
Thank you, Abe. The next question is there any evidence that continuous performance management has a positive impact on employee satisfaction or employee retention?
There is. So and all you have to do is a little bit of just even Google research. There's a lot of analysts that are releasing studies out there. So I showed a couple of them earlier on, but employee engagement, employee turnover have all been positively impacted. Turnover by a reduction of 30%. Employee engagement. Now, I showed a data point of employee engagement with just implementing performance management processes improved by 10%, but with continuous performance management, typically you see that number 30 to 40% and above, right? So you'll see a lot of that evidence. So as you start to build your business case for implementing the process within your organization, you'll find very quick evidence, from a lot of recent studies that demonstrate that this process can be impactful.
Okay, let's see. The next question we've had come through is, it seems like this is more work for managers. How does it help them?
That's actually probably an often used objection by the management team, because, they think about, okay, well, I'm just going to do my review process in January, maybe in June, and I never have to think about it again, right? And that's, I hate to simplify it to that line of thinking, but a lot of times it comes down to that, right? And yes, maybe at surface level, if we're talking about, oh, well, now I need to meet with my employee, 12, 13 times, capture some information, right? It seems like a lot of work, right? Well, first of all, I'll tell them is that first, don't think of these, conversations as that long drawn out process that you do at the end of the year. That's completely counterintuitive. It should be smaller bite-sized conversations, right? That don't have to take a lot of time. And then the second thing is that former line of thinking is what's going to get you into challenges with your people. That's what's driving the employee dissatisfaction, employees not being engaged, right? When, you just forget things that they do, after several months have gone by. So you're not really, demonstrating to your employee that you've recognized the achievement, their activities, their positive, contributions, when you're not able to accurately depict them, and the impact that they made, right? If I'm having that more incrementally, us as people are going to appreciate that more, right? So in reality, the opportunity cost is far outweighs the little bit, the more incremental time that you might spend throughout the whole year, right? But I'm telling you, if you're just waiting until the same annual review, you're going to have bigger issues.
Okay. And another question would be, does CPM help other areas of HR?
Oh, absolutely does, right? I mean, when you think about performance management as a whole, right, serves as a data input for things like learning, right? Things, like succession, other strategic pillars of HR. Now, by implementing an incremental proactive process like CPM, I'm able to get data to those other pillars much quicker, right? So as an example, like if I see, I've just promoted an employee to maybe an advanced engineer, right? But then notice that they're struggling with some of their projects because of a particular skill set, and that comes out in a conversation. Now I can set up a workflow that in turn brings in learning into the equation and gets that skill immediately remedied through a formal learning program, right? So it absolutely can serve as an input for other areas. And then, you think of it from HR perspective too, is I'm now gaining more real-time view of my performance over my existing workforce. Now I can, make decisions on the broader workforce discussions, again, dealing with more real-time data and more live data. So things like recruiting can be impacted, or, things like how I shift and move around my workforce can also be impacted. So absolutely, it creates a lot of opportunities to just funnel those workflows to other strategic pillars of HR.
Okay. Well, it looks like as there are no more questions, this does conclude today's webinar. A recording of this will be sent to all participants. You will each also be receiving a survey after this webinar. Please take a few moments and provide your feedback. In the meantime, if you do have any questions, please email info@microexcel.com. Thank you and have a wonderful day.